Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we're doing another of our daily Pride Month decks. This is obviously deck number 2 and it's titled Legolas and Yomiji, Kissing. And if you didn't catch our first episode, what we are doing this week for Pride Month, we are building a commander deck using 2 non-partner commanders with a budget of $100 or less in the hopes that we can celebrate the diversity of the LGBTQ plus community every single day in June. Now, today's deck is going to be obviously focused on the 2 title characters from the title of the deck. That is Legolas Greenleaf and Yomiji, who bars the way. Legolas is 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary creature elf archer. He's got reach, can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Whenever another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Legolas Greenleaf, and whenever Legolas Greenleaf deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So a bit of a legendary matters theme in there with Legolas, but also kind of a building up into a Voltron strategy as well. So to partner with Legolas, because everyone needs a good partner, we have Yomiji, who bars the way, which is 5 white for a 4/4 legendary creature spirit. Whenever a legendary permanent other than Yomiji is put into a graveyard from play, return that card to its owner's hand. Now, a couple of key things to keep in mind about Yomiji and the way that ability functions. It is any legendary permanent. It's not just legendary permanents we control, so that is something to be aware of. But it is a legendary theme that fits pretty well with Legolas. So let's break down this deck and talk a little bit about some themes that make it work. The very first theme that I want to highlight is going to be, of course, legendary permanents. So Reiki, the history of Kamigawa, is a great example of that because he is 2 and a green for a 1/2 legendary creature human shaman. Whenever you play a legendary spell, draw a card. There is quite a bit of legendary synergies in the Selesnya colors, so we can really build around both of our commanders in that way. And I think that it's a good build to kind of draw a bunch of cards, get some synergies going, and put us in a position where we're both building up Legolas, but we're also putting ourselves in a position where if any of our creatures die, we can return them with Yomiji, kind of giving us this ability to go a little bit wide, go a little bit tall at the same time, and continuously make sure that we never run out of value. Moving on to our second theme of the deck, this one is going to be making mana and finding ways to use our legendary permanents to generate value. So Honor-Worn Shaku is 3 mana for an artifact. It can tap for a colorless mana, but we can tap an untapped legendary permanent we control to untap the Honor-Worn Shaku, essentially letting all of our legendary permanents tap for a colorless mana in a weird roundabout way that involves tapping and untapping and all of this nonsense, but it's still a great way for us to put our creatures into play. And then if we can't attack with them or we can't do something with them, we can at least then use them for mana or use them for value in a way that's still going to be relevant to the overall cohesion of the deck. And then finally, our third theme for this deck is going to be card draw, and more specifically, card draw based on creatures. We are kind of overwhelmed with creatures in this deck. We have a ton of legendary creatures because we want to continuously trigger Legolas and be able to return them with Yomiji. So because of that, a lot of our card draw effects, so that way we can obviously keep playing more and more of our deck, is focused on creatures. And a good example of that is Beast Whisperer, which is 2 green for a 2/3 elf druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. So if we have that combined with Reiki, we can cast a legendary creature and draw 2 cards. Plus with the Shaku, we can then tap that creature to untap the Shaku to make more mana, to cast more creatures, to draw more cards. And you can kind of see how the wheels on this deck get turning, because we really want to just keep generating value and keep playing creatures and keep drawing cards and keep making mana until eventually our opponents can't do anything to stop us. So those are our themes for the deck today. And our next piece of this deck tech is to take a look at some key cards. These are cards that really synergize with what our deck is trying to do and are probably the MVPs overall of the deck. So first up, we have the Peregrine Dynamo, which is 3 mana for a 1/5 legendary artifact creature construct. It has haste, and you can pay 1 and tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control from another legendary source that's not a commander, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Because our deck is almost entirely legendary creatures, we can almost always have a target for the Peregrine Dynamo, and being able to double up on triggered and activated abilities is incredibly powerful because it's not just triggering on some random creatures that we may have, but it can copy up the card draw with Reiki. It can copy up the +1/+1 counter ability with Legolas. It can copy a bunch of other stuff in the deck that really put us in a winning position. So the Peregrine Dynamo, while it doesn't seem very powerful on its front, as long as we have the legendary supports for it, it is easily one of the best cards in the entire deck. Moving on to our second key card. This one is going to be the Relic of Legends. So we talked earlier about the Honor-Worn Shaku being able to essentially tap our legends for colorless mana. Relic of Legends is that, but to the next level, because it is 3 mana for an artifact that can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and we can tap an untapped legendary creature we control to add 1 mana of any color. So now, our legendary creatures can tap for any color of mana, not just colorless. And that is incredibly helpful because while we're not a super color heavy deck, we're only 2 colors with the green and the white, but it's still going to be relevant so we can always make sure we have what we need to play whatever spells we need to cast at any given time. It's also worth mentioning that this effect doesn't care if the creatures have summoning sickness or not, because it doesn't give the creature itself the ability to tap. It is tapped by the relic. So we can cast a creature and immediately tap that creature to make more mana to cast another creature if that's something we need to be doing. And that is our second key card. So moving on to our third key card for our deck today, we have Gandalf the White. And Gandalf, 3 white for a 4/5 legendary creature avatar wizard. He's got flash. You may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. And if a legendary permanent or an artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This is by far one of the best cards in the entire deck, because not only does it now let us play essentially our entire deck on our opponent's turns because it's giving all of our legends flash, it's also doubling any enter the battlefield effects that we have or any leave the battlefield effects that we have. And admittedly, we don't have a ton of leave the battlefield effects that are going to be relevant to be doubled, but it's still nice to have. And if we can obviously double up on all of our abilities, then that's going to easily push us to a victory. So those are our key cards this week. And the next piece of our deck tech is, of course, to take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that work really well together, and in some cases are just kind of fun cards that I want to highlight. So our first pair of cool interaction cards is going to be between Kutzil Malamet Exemplar and Flowering of the White Tree. So Kutzil is 1 green-white for a 3/3 legendary creature cat warrior. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. This is already a very underrated ability in Commander. And whenever 1 or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So the way that this would work is if Kutzil is a 3/3 and we attack, we don't draw a card. But if Kutzil is a 4/3, we attack, we draw a card because the 4 is greater than the base power of 3. The reason that that's going to be relevant is if we partner it up with Flowering of the White Tree, which is a white legendary enchantment. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+1 and have ward 1, and non-legendary creatures you control get +1/+1. The flowering of the white tree immediately pumps up all of our creatures, whether they're legendary or not, meaning Kutsil will always let us draw a card when any creature deals combat damage to an opponent, and it's giving our legendary creatures that additional boost of +2/+1 and Ward 1, meaning Kutsil becomes a 5/4 with Ward 1, which is much harder to deal with. Not only is it harder to deal with in combat, but the Ward 1 actually is relevant because it turns things like a Swords to Plowshares, what is normally a 1 mana removal spell, into a 2 mana removal spell. And while that doesn't initially seem that much, it becomes much harder for our opponents to be able to leave up mana to deal with what we're doing. And on top of all of that, they still can't cast spells on our turn. So if we can drop the Flowering of the White Tree and Kutsil, our opponents have to deal with our things on someone else's turn, meaning we are almost always going to have more information than they do when it comes to what's going on. But anyway, before I get too in-depth with these two, because I do really like both of these cards in the deck, let's move on to our second cool interaction, which is going to be between Robaran Mercenaries and Lauren of the Third Path. So Robaran Mercenaries, 3 and a white for a 3/4 human mercenary with vigilance, and it has all activated abilities of all legendary creatures you control. Obviously very good on its own already, but one of the best creatures that is legendary and has an activated ability that we would like to give to something else is Lauren of the Third Path, which is 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary creature human artificer. Vigilance, when she enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. Notably, that is not an activated ability. We do not give that to the Robaran Mercenaries. What we do give to the Robaran Mercenaries is tap you and target opponent each draw a card. This is a great way to kind of curry some favor around the table and try to maybe help out the person who's stuck on mana, put yourself in a good position with a certain opponent, and maybe help your opponents draw into board wipes to deal with the archenemy. So I genuinely think Lauren's ability to draw yourself and someone else a card is very powerful, and if we can have that on 2 creatures, it actually gets even better as the course of the game goes on, because we get to draw 2, but we can spread out who draws that other 1, meaning we can always be a step ahead of everybody else. That, though, is our last cool interaction. So the final piece of our deck tech is to take a look at the price of the deck. And this week, the deck came in at $95.75, very close to our budget limit, with the most expensive card in the entire deck being Mithril Coat at a whopping $16.84. And Mithril Coat, 3 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It has flash, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Equipped creature has indestructible, and it equips for 3. This is one of those cards that I wish I could put in every single deck that I make, which is probably why it's almost $17, but I very rarely actually get to. Being able to flash in an indestructible equipment that also gives a creature indestructible and auto-equips to a legend means that this is a phenomenal protection piece for a commander in any deck, but in our Legendary Matters deck, it's even better because we can kind of pick and choose which creature it's going to get attached to at any given time. So that is one of the best pieces of Mithril Coat, and definitely why it's so expensive. Obviously, if you do need to trim for budget purposes, there are plenty of cards that give your entire team indestructible that are just kind of one-time use effects. Those might be solid inclusions as a way to kind of budget down the deck, but also, unfortunately, I think power down the deck as well. So keep that in mind if you do decide to put this together. That, though, is the end of our deck tech. So thank you all so much to everybody for watching. Thank you all so much for all of the support for these daily decks. I'm really having a ton of fun doing them. I built them all last year, so I think they may be out of date, but I love doing these deck techs. I'm hoping to someday do games on them. It is incredibly time consuming to do so, but that is the goal someday. So Thank you again. If you haven't already, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really lets me know that you guys are enjoying what's happening. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please do let me know. And as always, a huge shout out to all of our patrons and channel members. Thank you all so much for going above and beyond in your support of the channel. But with all that being said, thank you again. Happy Pride Month, everybody, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.